Hello, everyone. What do we have here? We have age 114 revised changes. What? I know, right? Impossible. Going cameraless this time because I was too lazy to plug in my camera. And I decided to just throw this in before bed, so here we go. Unknown schedule, assume 70 days, naturally a week longer, shorter, makes science a fair bit more or less strong. Some chat GPT written poetry, we assume. Nobody knows for sure. But I feel like unless Wind is writing it himself, no one else is. Defects, no longer ignore Kingdom Wall. If 22 provinces are above, I'm sure that's a good change. I don't really know or care. First major change of the age, war doctrines or battle doctrines. What are these? These are kingdom-wide buffs that you get during war only that come from the number of not number of races you have, but number of provinces of a specific race you have. How they work is that the first province of a particular race will give you a 1.5 or 2% bonus, and then every additional race of that province, every province of that race type will give you a 0.5% bonus on top of that, and they cap at either 5 or 7.5%. This maths out to you needing between 7 and 11 races to max out a bonus, so you might be able to see 3 or 4 maxed out bonuses, or 3 maxed out bonuses, and then 2% of all the other bonuses. Overall, most of these bonuses, when maxed, I'd say they're usually about half as strong as a feature of, no, that's not even quite right. Maybe a third as strong as a main personality feature, so having 3 of them is almost as much as having a personality bonus. I didn't mean full personality bonus, but a, sort of their defining bonus. For example, you can get 5% attack speed reduction or 7.5% minus casualties from these racial bonuses, which is about a third of what you would see from tacticians, 15% attack speed, or a cleric's 25% minus losses in a traditional age. So we'll see that as we go on. It doesn't extend past the max that we'll see on each race. And then the second big change of the age is massacres in war being nerfed by about 33% in terms of their peasant, wizard, and thief kills. Naturally, they'll have the same gangbang protection and military losses, which on their own can be a lot of the power of massacre in certain situations. I don't know if this is the right change. I think it's a fine change to do just to see what happens, because it's not like any individual age is that important, and if you don't have a better idea, maybe you just try this out and see what happens, and then say, maybe this solves part of the problem, but not another part of the problem. And you can make a decision, okay, do we put a Band-Aid on that new problem we've introduced, or do we decide a new method to fix the original problem? Now, when you do that, it's a little compoundingly difficult because you have to then factor in the racial personality balance along with any other mechanics changes, but you get the idea. This is, I would just consider this a bug fix more than anything. I don't think the reduced military losses of those 2 attack types were ever meant to carry over to war. It's just that nobody ever complained about it being the case. So will this lead to people plundering in war? I doubt it. Will it lead to more learns in war? It's possible. I wouldn't say it's too likely. However, with the nerf to massacre, I could see some potential to using learns mixed in, either to replace or supplement massacres. Might be a good idea. What we don't see in these changes is any confirmation that the, quote, amnesia problem that they were trying to fix is made any progress. We removed all the big science efficiency and science-based things last age, like human buffs and sages. And what did we get this age? No mention of it, so still no amnesia. So we'll see how that goes. Out of War attack penalty update. When you attack someone that is below you, and by someone I mean a kingdom that is below you in all of War range metrics, also known as 85% of your land and net worth, the following attack modifiers apply. 10% less gains, plus 10% self-military casualties, minus 25% honor gains, and you'll suffer a plus 25% attack time nerf. This is brutal, because there is no reverse penalty. So you can very easily find someone 125% or 150% or 200% your net worth and just do a bunch of learns on them. And what are they going to do back to you? Learn you back with minus 10% gains and plus 25% attack speed? I don't really think so. So if you want to be a big pest this next age, there's going to be a lot of potential for it in both micros taking land as well as taking science. So I would suggest you have some sort of ace up your sleeve in dealing with these particular pests. Either some sort of kill stacking you can use to, deter people, or maybe something like, I don't know, strong thieves out of war that can be a problem. Whatever you choose is up to you, but you're going to want something that can deter these people. A good method is just diplomacy early and often. Try to make friends, but you do you, bro. Dragons. When it says dragons are stepping out of auto-pick territory, I don't know what that means. I don't think it refers to sending dragons at all. I think it's referring to the balance within the dragons themselves. But I don't understand why that's a thing. I also don't understand why there's a cost modifier on 3 of these dragons, but not the other 3, considering that Emerald dragons exist right now with this cost modifier, and Ruby dragons exist right now with that cost modifier, but it only shows up here on Emerald dragon, so that's confusing. The new dragon Amethyst, minus 40% spell and thievery success, not a WTPA nerf. This is a success nerf, so you won't be easier to target. You just won't be very useful offensively. And it also comes with a minus 1% mana and stealth regeneration, as well as enemy provinces suffer plus 25% thievery and wizard losses on failed spells and sabotage operations. I think what that means when it says enemy provinces would be the people suffering the dragon. I don't know. Probably a better word you can use than enemy provinces there to make that obvious, but I think it should be clear enough the intent. This dragon, while you certainly don't want to tank one of these forever, because those are really bad for your thief mages, there is 2 things, however, I see here. One is that you can just tank it for a wave, slay, and then keep your mana and stealth regenerating and use it after the dragon. And at worst, say that you send it after a wave, you might lose 10% stealth and mana on everyone, which is not great, but you can save up that stealth and mana and use it after the dragon's dead. Also, if you had basically no TMs, maybe you could ignore this dragon. It's certainly not a dragon you're going to want to tank and do things through. It's a dragon that you can tank and then slay. Seems decently strong. You send it at the very start of a war when everyone's throwing ops, and you might force someone to either opt through it or wait to slay, but that's true for most dragons. Emerald Dragon, plus 25% casualties, minus 25% combat gains, 40% train time modifier. I'm not really sure how that's different than the current Emerald Dragon. I would say Emerald Dragon was already the least picked dragon, and honestly, to me, this seems like a nerf to Emerald Dragon, because it used to have minus 40% credit gains, which was actually the worst part of Emerald. So, if we're trying to fix dragons in auto-pick territory, why are we nerfing what I would consider the least used dragon? This seems counter to its own goals, but we'll see. Celeste Dragon, minus 30% birth rates, minus 30% hospital effectiveness, and minus 30% credits gained in combat. I don't expect this to be used at all. Maybe there's a world where that birth rate really matters, but considering you can just slay the dragon after waiting, the penalties are very low on that point. And even if you never slew this dragon, I don't think it would be all that bad. So I think that dragon's pretty bad. Ruby Dragon looks unchanged. Topaz Dragon looks unchanged. Sapphire Dragon looks unchanged. So, yeah, I don't really understand the Celestite Dragon. I just don't think it's quite there, and I don't understand why they would nerf Emerald Dragon, if whatever. But I don't mind this Amethyst Dragon. I think it's pretty nice. And now for another big change, elites no longer do combined slay damage on their offense and defense to dragons. However, dragon hit points wasn't changed, so now it's very hard to slay dragons. At least in terms of just, yeah, the amount of raw offense and defense that you have to send at a dragon is about 50% higher on average with this change. So, you know, dragons aren't already the easiest thing to slay. They're not bad if you've got elites, but now it's much worse. So, is there a good way to plan around that? I don't know. Maybe artisans, and you really force... Well, artisans don't even have a capacity buff anymore, so it's going to be difficult to slay. Invest more in Valor Science, figure out if you can tank dragons, or just try to send more dragons than the other guy. But yes, dragon-based and economy-based warfare is going to take a significant buff. I think with these changes, TMs and economy combined are going to be a lot stronger. People that can tank dragons and slay dragons and send dragons see a big buff. So I expect that to be somewhat changed or mitigated, but we'll see. Barriers. Ritual Barrier has a birth rate buff that it didn't used to have, and otherwise I believe it's the same. Oh, the massacre damage, and it might have been this was minus 20% damage before. I think that's a pretty strong ritual right now, especially with sort of TM and dragon-based options. You can run this and get a lot of birth rate and tank a lot, and I think it'll be strong. So I think Barrier's strong. I'll have to test it out compared to, you know, the old classics. Expedient is significantly buffed now with 25% building efficiency. and minus 25% construction time, which is now shared by it and haste, but is otherwise unchanged. I think this is also very strong. I think 25% building efficiency is bordering on we can start breaking the game territory with certain things. Yeah, the potential to really make yourself hard to interact with out of war is super high with this ritual. You can really reliably start maxing out things like castles and hospitals out of war and become a really big pain in the ass to deal with, and there's not much mitigation you can do without being able to chain or op people. Ascendancy nerfed by 50% on everything, so only 50% more whiz production instead of 100% more, which isn't actually 50% nerf. It's more like a 1/3 nerf or 25% nerf, whereas the book nerf is more significant. So I don't think it's significantly weaker. You do get less wizards overall, you do get more books, and it sort of evens out. Haste, no change. Havoc, no change. Onslaught, no change. Stalwart, no change. I think Haste and Onslaught are the most popular rituals currently. I think Stalwart has a small place, and Havoc is not very good at all, except for niche situations, so I could see these new writs being used. We'll see. Spell changes. Greed is 40% wage nerf now and no longer affects draft. Stick tap for those that didn't realize that greed affected wages at all. So there you go. Draft at all. Pretty big buff to greed. Being able to maintain one-sided greed or maintain greed in general now it's a big hit for what we're now perceiving as dragon-based warfare, being able to choke out the economy and force people out of being able to pay wages. Send a ruby dragon, you're stacking 40% and 30% wages is pretty out there. Since it's not as easy to instant slay dragons anymore, especially if you're using all defense, tanking 8 hours of basically 200% wages doesn't look fun. Clear sight nerfed to 20% from 25%. Not overly significant, and I forget who even has clear sight, so who cares? So let's get into racial changes. What we don't have here is a reference to current age, so I'll pull that up on my other monitor if I think it's relevant. And what do we have? Minus 20% attack time. That's a slight nerf. We have no birth rate, but we have minus 40% training time. I'm not the biggest proponent to training time being overly beneficial or painful to have more or less of. For sure it helps somewhat, but does it help a lot? I don't know. I think I'll evaluate these as effectively every race having its max war doctrine. I think that's fair, because in most contexts, when we think of races, we think of running a core or half a core of them, and that should be enough to max out the ability. Maybe for TM, I'll slightly adjust this rule. So with that, it is sort of like minus 25% attack time. You're trading the training time for birth rate. I'd say birth rate's a little stronger. Maybe even a fair bit stronger, but I don't think it's negligible either, the training time, especially with very strong O-specs on the Avian, and there's a fair bit of free credits going around in the personalities depending on what you pick. Avian no longer is limited without barracks. They also gained the penalty they cannot ambush. And they lost their plus 15% military casualties. So Avians are quite a bit tankier. They lost Reflect Magic. Their offense has gone up pretty significantly. +1 O-Spec, +1 Elite offense. Quite a bit more defense on their Elite as well. But they did also take a -1 to their D-Spec. Overall, it's a lot of offense. Anytime you get avians that start creeping into offense levels that can really reliably 3-tap core and hit TMs all the time, they tend to just get too strong. And they're also very strong when you have that much defense on your Elite, and you're able to... Essentially, it's impossible to wave them out of war, because they'll both beat you home, and you can do very little damage to them because you can't multi-tap them and overpop them. You can't hurt their economy that much. And in modern Utopia, the Elite damages aren't significant enough to worry about either, in my opinion. So, I would say maybe the numbers alone don't back it up, but I'm actually going to put avians at a really high tier. I think without the casualty nerf and their ability to slot in just 10% extra barracks makes them very fast and strong. I think an avian warrior next stage is going to be something to contend with for sure. What I didn't mention is their unique passive, learns and plunders, return 1 tick faster. Mostly negligible. Being able to save an hour on learn waves out of war isn't that interesting when you already have built-in minus attack speeds. So maybe just consider it a slight buff in gains. But that's a huge nerf over their old unique ability, so do factor that in. But otherwise, I'm pretty confident that avians are strong. Dark Elf. Dark Elf's interesting. You know, that 15-point O-Spec looks like a lot. And it is a lot, no doubt. But how a lot is it? Because last age, a mounted O-Spec for a Dark Elf was 14.5. In this age, it's 17. So that is, yeah, it's like 20% more offense, I guess. And with their Elite, if it's full Elite defense, you are more defense and more offense than last age. Birth rate penalty is rough on what's presumably an attacker. There's a world where you could run this as a TM, but I think you're going to see these as attackers and hybrids. That's a big military. I know I've skipped right over to the military this time and didn't talk about the rest of their bonuses, but it's pretty hard to ignore that 15-point O-Spec and also that 8-point D-Spec. So you're going to be you're not going to be able to retrain defense at all. You're going to be really reliant on the elites you do have, but the offense you have is very high. Your offense/defense on a Dark Elf is already way higher than that of a avian. You won't quite match them in elite home defense, but it's going to be close enough. I don't think it matters. And then what benefits do you have? Plus 25% instant spell damage, very strong. Minus 50% rune cost, very strong. Can train thieves using spec credits. A really good economic bonus if you're forced to train elites like they are. That's going to save you sometimes 1,500 gold per acre in End of War Ceasefire, which is going to be something like an extra 3 EPA that you can train, because those elites are pretty cheap too. It's not like it's really hard to train full elites on them. And with elites being 50% stronger on defense than the D-Spec, I would even train those out of war, no problem, rather than train D-Specs. In their War Doctrine, another 7.5% instant spell damage, so you're looking at 33% extra instant spell damage, minus 50% rune cost. Their unique passive is another 20% rune cost refund on successful spells, instant spells specifically. So that just works out to minus 60% rune cost for most things. They have Blizzard, Mage's Fury, Illuminate Shadows, Pitfalls, Fountain of Knowledge, and Quick Feet. So not only do they have quite a better military than Avians, they also have Quick Feet, so they're not even that much slower. The reduced spell cost is going to be very strong for chain mitigation, because you'll be able to land lust quite cheaply. In general, you're going to have a lot less tower requirements in your builds. Illuminate Shadows is really strong. Fountain of Knowledge is going to scale you just a little bit. So, and Mage's Fury is, again, going to help you specifically with that land lust, and if you want to fireball a bit. What Dark Elf doesn't have here is that built-in magic efficiency they had last age. So they won't be quite as hard to cast upon. They won't have that like plus 50% offensive output either with their Mage's Fury and built-in WPA. But you have a lot of instant damage. You have Thieve Tankery, you have a bit of scaling, you have incredible military and speed. Your main thing is going to be just maintaining peasants with the birth rate penalty. And that can be a problem, but, you know, I think you're probably going to be able to do more fireball damage than the enemy, so that'll probably even out. Maybe. And O-Spec offense has a lot of benefits. You can learn people out of war a lot easier. You can maintain offense in war a lot easier if you combine this with something giving you credit bonuses that's very strong, etc. So that's the sort of thing I'd be looking out for. A strong attack mage pick without, you know, there's absolutely no real thief bonus in here despite the thief credit, so there's times where that can be beneficial. I think with the Massacre nerf, the thief training with spec credits is a little less beneficial, but we'll see. So yeah, I like these Dark Elf. I'd say they're very, very strong. Dwarf! 25% building efficiency, 20% less construction time, 20% more building credits in combat. Neither the construction time or build credits are very significant. 25% building efficiency is, of course, very strong always, but I'd say it's mostly a scaling bonus. It is very good all age, but it does really come into its own later age. Their War Doctrine is a minus 7.5% construction time for you in all your kingdom. I still don't think it's that beneficial. You'll save some time, but a lot of why you want fast build times is to get land in before your attacks. And you have an attack speed nerf in here, so it's sort of not the biggest buff. They have Town Watch, sure, for getting deep chained, but I would suggest not getting deep chained as a dwarf. You're a tankier sort of build with build efficiency bonuses. I would usually suggest you try to not get deep chained. It hurts. Miner's Mystique, a bit of eco, reflect magic, very good spell to have on any province. Unique passive, damage reduce 15% and raise attacks destroy plus 20% additional buildings. I read that as moving a raise from 30% to 50% and not 30% to 36% because of how it's worded. I haven't had an official clarification on this yet, so we don't know. Also, this should probably mention in war, because there is in fact a raise attack out of war. So, like, what's the deal with that? You should clarify both of those things. A 10% attack time nerf is a big problem, unless you have really incredible offense is the one time where that can kind of work out, and even then, not ideal. So what do they have for having, you know, a modest bonus, but a pretty moderate penalty as well? They have a 10 O spec, very boring. A base warhorse, very boring. 11 D spec is a nice little bonus. And they have a 14-8 elite. So this is our lowest offense by far. It's less offense and less defense than the Dark Elf. The Bane benefit here is similar to the Avian and much better probably than the Avian. You are incredibly difficult to hit when you're sitting armies home, because you're going to have almost as much defense as a TM depending on how you build, because if you've got 12 elites per acre and 8 D-specs per acre, you're essentially sitting on 20 D-specs per acre. That's in range of most TMs. And with high build efficiency, you can stack things like castles, hospitals, forts, and be incredibly hard to hit or do damage to with those elites home. The problem becomes, well, how is that actually good for your kingdom? You are going to need to be attacking out, and you're going to need to be attacking out with all of your elites to do a lot of damage because you're an attacker? Question mark. So if your attack time is longer, you're not going to be able to beat people home. You can't really play elite home tricks or anything. I'm not seeing it for Dwarf. I consider them pretty strong with the raise attack specifically, if it's my interpretation, but otherwise the weakest we've seen, and I think overall probably the weakest core. Yeah, you just got to be able to break TMs, or you got to be able to offer something more than defense as an attacker. Elf, 30% WPA, incredibly strong bonus, 1 mana per tick in war, stealing the fairy bonus of the last few ages, a 25% guild bonus. That's good to help your duration casting as well as your wizard production. War Doctrine, minus 7.5% military casualties taken to you and all your kingdom. Pretty strong, not bad. There's very little military sustainment in these changes, so this is one of the few options you do have. Arcane Surge, whenever your province mana is below 40%, you deal plus 25% spell damage. So 30% WPA and 25% spell damage is a fireballing machine, let's say. Spells, Pitfall, Wrath, Quick Feet, Fountain of Knowledge. Very similar spells to the Dark Elf. You have that tiny bit of book scaling with Fountain of Knowledge. You have some attack speed that other people don't have. Wrath is nice. It's not amazing. There are strategies for sure you can run where Wrath is more significant, but we'll see. Penalties, minus 20% TPA. Pretty significant. It does limit you in options quite a bit in both terms of TM and attacker and hybrid. You're always at risk of Night Strike and Greater Arson no matter what you do, so you have to keep that in mind. What do they have going for them other than a wonderful set of wizard bonuses? They have a 13-point D-spec, which is pretty dang high. That's +1 over last age, and it was pretty easy to spam D-specs last age. Now, still less defense than, say, a fairy last age, but not by a ton. And their elite is 2 offense stronger than last age, and a pretty good defense attached as well. So I can see Elf running hybrid as well as pure TM. As a pure attacker, it's sort of like, well, what does a pure attacker mean? I don't think there's such thing as a pure attacker with these sorts of mana bonuses, because you are just going to want to be using that. You no longer have a rune production benefit, so you'll have to figure out some way to use all that mana efficiently. Maybe you got some dwarves or artisans or something, because until late game, it's pretty hard to use that much mana if you're having a lot of these elves. However, you've got 10% attack speed, more defense, and more offense than last age, with a pretty cheap elite again. So this is pretty much on par with the Dark Elf. If we look at it, one less offense, one more defense, assuming a pure elite on both. And what are the differences? Instant spell damage. Elf has that when they're low mana. Rune cost, Elf can't match that. What Elf can do is use more spells when you do have the rune cast. Mage's Fury. So in most situations, your offensive WPA is going to be equal on Dark Elf and Elf, but the Elf is going to have about double the defensive WPA. Dark Elf has more defense against wizards, however, so there's things. They're very similar, but they're very different in how they'll act and how they'll scale. And an elf can add a lot more defense in war. I could see a pretty high offense to start elf that tacks on a lot of D-specs with credits, so we'll see how that works. Overall, I think elf is stronger as a TM and attacker. I think for the most part, everyone seems buffed this age. So, who knows? Fairy. Everyone loves a fairy. I've been running all fairy TMs for like 5 ages, so let's see if they finally nerf fairy. Or maybe I'm just an idiot that needs to stop picking fairies. Both of those are probably true. So this spell list looks slightly reduced. I don't see Mist or Wrath. Don't see Fool's Gold. And I don't see Invisibility. So those are all pretty significant nerfs. Specifically, Invis is a big one to miss. So is Fool's Gold. What you do have is Miner's Mystique with Tree of Gold with +1 mana, so a lot of money. You have a cheaper elite, quite a bit, and it's a huge one. So this is a over 20% defense buff to Fairy, who I already considered the highest easy to attain defense in the game. Cheaper elites, over 20% more defense. This might be sort of your only real path to slaying dragons, is having strong, unbreakable fairies that can slay and get some stuff going for them. Their BE penalty is down to 10% from 5%. It is a problem for both casters and thieves to have that BE penalty. You want better watchtowers, you want better thieves' dens, so there's an issue there, especially with the loss of Invis. Having worse thieves' dens, having no Invis, it's going to make your thieves a lot less resilient. But what you do have is plus 25% spell duration, and that is now self-spells included, which is a very big buff to your mana output. You have that +1 mana per tick, every tick of the whole age, and plus 25% WPA. That combos with your Mage's Fury for some incredibly strong casting, by far the best casting race offensively in the game, with defense that's, 16.8 versus 13 of the next highest we've seen so far in an elf. So that's about 30% more defense than elf. They scale with Rev and Fountain of Knowledge. They have sort of everything they need. What do they have for Doctrine? Minus 7.5% Thievery and Magic instant damage on you and your kingdom. A pretty decent buff, but the way instant damage negative modifiers work with repeated spell attempts, it's sort of negligible. Like, you don't really notice it much, so while it's good, you won't notice that it's good. You won't notice if it makes it so you win, but it'll be there. And enemy spells against a fairy have 15% chance to fail. In general, fairy are not going to be cast on that easily or that much with a 25% WPA buff. but a fairy with Mage's Fury up can still be cast on pretty easily by another fairy with Mage's Fury, or an elf in theory. So, 15% chance to fail on top of that's pretty annoying. It's basically a magical clear sight. So, overall, fairy looks excellent in that pure TM role, but it's a struggle to add offense to that. You can run, say, 12 EPA instead of 16, run 4 Auspex per acre for maybe 70 to 100 OPA. Is it worth it? Probably not, but you could. TFC, where are you at? Alright, Halfling. Halfling took a 5% population nerf. I don't even think I realized that Halfling was at plus 15% last stage, but here we are. A 10% population buff, 1 stealth regen per tick, and 20% thievery effectiveness. They have no invis and a nerfed thievery effectiveness, so about 20% worse thieves than last age. They did gain greater protection and +1 to their D-spec, so they have quite a lot of potential defense. That's going to be, we'll just call it 10% more defense than last age when you factor in the population. But what they have going for them that's very interesting is that 1311 Elite. They are the only race so far, and only race we've seen in a while that has that sort of elite, where it's both the highest offense and defense. So, similar to a dwarf, if you run D-specs and elites, your army home defense is going to be incredibly high. You can run a pure TM that has elites as some of their defense, and that can slay dragons better. When you get unbreakable, you can start hitting, or you can play as a hybrid optionally at your own choice. Those are all very strong options to have. It's a little bit net worth inflatey, but it's not necessarily that bad. As a rogue, for example, you could rob horses. You don't need to spend that extra space. Penalties, no access to hospitals. Most pure TMs aren't ever building hospitals, so not necessarily a penalty. And 10% more military casualties. Not lovely as hybrid, attacker, or TM, but if you are flirting with Unbreakable, it means you aren't getting hit, so maybe that's not an issue either. Their unique ability is if 2 or more halflings op a single target in the same tick, all subsequent operations deal 20% more damage. It says deals 20% effectiveness, which is not English. Is it deals 20% effectiveness? Still not English. 20% more damage, or has plus 20% TPA. Effectiveness is not the right word here. Does not stack, so you'll only see that 20% effectiveness. There's no cooldown on this, so you can do it to as many people as you want. And 2 halflings are not going to have trouble opping any province in the game, even if they had on how good you are at, training elites. I mean, that's a pretty expensive elite there, so it is going to be a problem trying to train those. Penalties minus 10% OME, so it's like they have an 18-point mounted elite. If you look at current age, they currently have a 17-point mounted elite, but they also have that 10 defense on their elite. So again, super hard to hit these people with their armies home. But if you can add attack speed and play around that, or what have you, they also have by far the highest net worth on any elite by, I think, 2-ish. So undeads are going to have really fucking high, excuse my language, defense and net worth. So I don't think I like, a lot of undead, but I think just enough for plague is going to be really good. You can go wide on undead with military losses, plague, and whatnot, but it's weird. I won't deny that they're strong, but there's something about them puts me off right now, and I'm not sure how to reconcile that. So I'd say put undead in the maybe bin for now until, we can think about it a little better. Personalities, what do we have? Oh, we also have no gnome next stage, just in case anyone cared about gnomes. Personalities, Artisan took a pretty significant nerf by losing their access to building capacity, so they no longer have stronger homes or stables in terms of how much they can hold. And that is a pretty significant nerf. It's about 5% land space in terms of stables. And it can be several population per acre in terms of pump with a lot of homes, and even if you're running homes in war. Should the building production include homes because they have a flat rate, birth rate? Probably. I might want to ask someone to look into that. Otherwise, there's still a great path towards getting a lot of runes. They're going to have a lot of gold. 15% artisan science efficiency. Not great. The 10% econ science efficiency they had last age was much stronger. They have ghost workers. It's a nice spell. Greater protection, a great defensive bonus for most races. The raise benefit's quite good. Overall, the biggest change here in their benefit is the 40% build and raise. Oh, that's cost even, not speed. Yeah, I think Artisan's just bad, except for the case where you just want them for the tower benefit. But I think they're just bad now. Yeah, so ignore that. I thought there was maybe more to it than that, but no, they're just bad. Paladins, I think are just quite different than they were last age. 5% population buff is not as strong as 15% attack speed or offense, which is what you usually see on a personality. 50% stable capacity in production. That's going to give you somewhere between 5 and 10% build space, 5 and 8% build space maybe for attackers, which is not nothing. 15% valor science efficiency. Certainly more impactful this age with the buff to dragons, but not the best science efficiency to have either compared to OME, crime, channeling. Immune to plague, depends how scared you are of undead. Unique passive, they have plus 15% enemy military casualties, and they suffer 10% more offensive military casualties. Pretty good. Plus 15% enemy. Well, it's on their attacks only, but plus 15% kills is still pretty good. I prefer when that also affects your defense, but overall, you know, it's sort of like Bloodlust without the offense, which is sort of like saying shit. But it's not nothing. I don't think Paladin's making the cut. I think Paladin and Artisan are both pretty weak compared to the rest. Like, I'd say both of these are worse than what we saw for Personalities last age by a margin, and we'll see that I'd say Tactician and Warrior are significantly buffed this age. So when those two things are simultaneously true, I think Paladin and Artisan are both completely skipped. Heretic, I consider Heretic pretty well nerfed. 5% auto fail against them is not significant, I don't think. Like, this is just bad, and their old benefit was really good, which was basically plus 20% thievery and magic damage. So they lost 20%. Heretics lost so much. They lost 20% thievery damage, 20% magic damage, and 15% arcane science efficiency, which was at the time by far the best, or maybe tied with Artisan for the best science bonus that any personality have. They didn't get anything in exchange for that. They have no new buffs. So, like, who the heck really hates heretics? Like, they want to remove strong nightmares from, because there's so many high defense provinces out there. They want to make also nightmares less good to deal with it. But then we'll see later that, you know, Necro has really good benefits there. So, yeah, I don't understand why Heretic is like this. It's very bad. Mystics. Mystics are pretty similar. Plus 100% guild effectiveness is a slight buff. Plus 1 mana per tick is the same. Plus 15% channeling science effectiveness or efficiency. All personalities we'll see have their 25% science buffs drop to 15%. I don't know the thought behind that. It does sort of nerf certain things with human, which is good when human have their own science buff. And in general, it makes most personalities a little less unique and powerful. Like, with only 15% science efficiency on channeling, it's a lot more easy. It's a lot easier for rogues to start pushing their defense, their wizard defense, to a point where you can't really cast on them. And that's sometimes a problem. Spells, they no longer have mind focus, which I appreciate. I think it's really dumb to give Mystic that many wizard buffs in terms of production, but whatever. They're also the only access to Chastity next age, and in focused age, you're going to find yourself maybe forced to have more Mystics for Chastity if you're not rolling like a pure attacker build, which maybe you should based on everything we've seen. They no longer have Mana Well, which was basically 0.5 mana regen per tick. Now instead they have plus 20% WPA on spells that they cast offensively when above 40% mana. So this is kind of funny because of how it stacks negatively with Elf. So it's like you can be an elf, and when you're above 40% mana, you cast Meteor Showers, and when you're below 40% mana, you cast Fireball. But that's kind of sad because Elf Mystic is just so classic, and then their two passives are going to be completely counter to each other. So, oh well. Rogues are nerfed in some ways. The Thieves' Den buff is really strong for Rogue, but they lost that plus 25% damage to assassinate wizards, and combine that with the mass nerf. It's going to be a lot harder to get rid of wizards next age. But the Thieves' Den effectiveness is a really big buff. Similarly, their crime science is down like wizards. So it's going to be a little easier to defend against rogues with your own MTPA, which is often not easy to do. They lost their plus 25% damage while over 100% stealth, which was a pretty good buff. Not the best in the world, but it came up pretty often, especially at war starts. Now instead, they are able to perform thievery ops while overpopulated. And in an age where we're going to massacre less and chain more, this is going to come into play, and it's going to be really awkward when you chain a rogue, and now he's propping your rogues, and you can prop well overpopped. Becoming more overpopped is very awkward. You're going to be able to assassinate wizards onto people that you would never otherwise be able to break. Your hybrid or even attacking rogues are going to be in this situation also. And if you do just have, like, soldiers to ride that overpopulated wave, you can just keep opping and keep opping with that plus TPA. So I'd say Rogue is probably still slightly weaker than last age, but they certainly have some strengths they didn't used to have. The Thieves' Den is really valuable in some ways. They're going to be much stronger at propaganda than last age, but much weaker at assassinate wizards. Tactician. This is where things get weird, because plus 50% credits is so much. Need I say more? They have 15% attack time. Attack time's great. We see a lot of high offense attackers with low defense, and the best way to capitalize on that is attack time. And if you think your race already has enough offense to break TMs, you don't need to pick warrior. Tactician's going to be your big thing. They have access to clear sight, which is nice. Not the world's biggest thing, but it's nice. Siege sign sufficiency, decent. Not the biggest buff in the world, but decent. No thieves loss on intel, we like it, but it's really this plus 50% credit gains is going to be super impactful if you have any peasants and soldiers at all. A lot of races have really strong credits and specs right now. Some less than others. Your orcs, for example, and your undead have a lot weaker credits than your, dark elves and even maybe humans. I forget. So the credits are maybe less good on some races, but we'll see. Might help you rebuild your defense as a core that is slaying dragons and using all your D-specs, and you can train them back with credits. So I'd say Tactician's definitely back in the running for a top core where it wasn't the last few ages. Maybe just last 2 ages. Unique passive dragon skin. While in war, dragon effects on your province are reduced by 40%. You're still not going to want to tank dragons, so it's just sort of nice if you're going to tank the dragon until your elites are home. But I don't, this isn't why you're picking Tactician, and it's just sort of nice to have, but it's not the focus here. You got the attack speed, and I think it's a really good age for attack speed, and you've got the credits, and I think it's going to be a really good age for credits. So, very strong Tactician. And then we go to Warrior, which is very strong. 10% OME and Bloodlust. So you've got 21% offense versus the traditional 15% offense off the bat. OME that stacks with prisoner and mercenary buffs and cheaper mercenaries. What you do have that's kind of lame is that the Tactician sign sufficiency is nerfed. If you're a ride or die sort of warrior, you're probably going to have 40% tactics science or more in the mid to late age. And so that's sort of like a 4% offense buff as the age goes on, which almost balances out their offense buff they got from Bloodlust and OME, but even more offense than ever on Warrior. Super strong. Definitely your alternative pick to Tactician for hitting things. It just depends if you want offense or speed and how you want to get your offense or speed. Really no downsides to picking Warrior on anything that hits stuff. Passive Battle Cry, doing 0.5% population damage. very strong. It adds up. It's one of those things you don't really notice, but it certainly adds up over time. Necromancer. You have a very strong Necromancer here. This is definitely better than Heretic for this sort of role. It's different. You don't get the damage buffs, but you have more WPA on a Necromancer than a Mystic, with that flat 30% WPA buff and the channeling. You get the 2 soldier buffs are pretty insignificant, but you have Mind Focus, which is almost as good as the guild buff for gaining wizards. And you have access to Nightmare. So this is basically a Mystic that has Nightmare. What you're missing out on is that sort of plus damage or plus mana. But you do have sort of plus damage specifically when you're looking at Fireball with their passive. This is sort of like a plus 20% damage to Fireball. It sort of also makes your Nightmares worse, which is weird, but whatever. Yeah, it's a lot of WPA. That 30% WPA buff is stronger than any of the race's WPA buffs built in, and it's very rare for a personality to have a buff that's stronger than a racial buff. So if you want to look at WPA, you should look at Necromancer. You know, a Dark Elf Necromancer, well, you don't have extra mana, you do have a lot of WPA. You're looking at like plus 70 WPA with Mage's Fury, and you have bonus spell damage. You're going to be able to fireball anything. You're going to be able to fireball Mystics for the most part, so keep that in mind. Elf and Fairy both have that plus mana built in, so you're going to be able to find ways to use Necromancer next stage for sure. Do you want a full core of Necromancers? Well, probably not, but you could make it work. You know, you do have to contend with the giant benefits we see in Tactician and Warrior, and it's hard to, you know, put that focus on WPA. So yeah, up to you guys. How do you think you want to use that? General, +1 general, plus 20% spec credits gained in combat, minus 20% training cost, train elites with spec credits in war. This is really strong for orcs, well, for a lot, basically all the attacking races, but especially for orcs and undead, that have like a 80% difference in their specs versus their elites. It's 2 or 3 times relatively a bigger bonus on those 2 races than any other race. Minus training cost is also going to be significant for something like undead, but with elite credits, you mostly are going to be able to get full elites trivially. Bookkeeping science efficiency, generally not what I'd consider the best science buff to have, but it will scale sort of in a heavy greed, heavy dragon focused age, so it might be nice. Access to wrath, it's something, it's not much. And plus 15% enemy military casuals when 2 or more generals are sent out. So strong. If you're doing 3 hits or less, you're going to have plus 15% damage on 2 of them. If you're doing 4 or 5 hits, okay, you're not getting those bonus kills, but you're already getting 4 or 5 hits out, so you can't complain that much, can you? I don't think it's as strong as Warrior or Tactician, but there are worlds where it can work out. The extra general can work really well in a low defense age, and you have, you know, a few other bonuses in there. So it's cute, maybe good for baiting, but I don't think it's quite as strong as other picks. And then you have War Hero, 20% honor gains on attacks. It says attacks only here, but I'll remind everyone, anywhere it says that your honor gains are higher or lower, it's always only attacks. Heroic Endeavor, while in war, honor losses are reduced by 30%. This does not apply to spells and ops. So keep that in mind. 20% honor gains, minus 30% honor losses, 10% OME in war, 50% honor effects, and 15% resilience science efficiency. If you want honor crown, it's going to be very hard to get it without war heroes. Those are just, you don't even need to be the best at war or win all your wars. You absolutely will get way more honor with your war heroes than you will anything else. It doesn't matter if tacticians and warriors are stronger and win more wars. The war hero bonuses for honor can't be passed up. So you'll end up in an interesting spot where a couple try-hard kingdoms that want honor might be forced to go war hero, and then because of that, they're warring at a disadvantage to other, maybe slightly worse kingdoms that run tacticians and warriors. So that's something to look out for. And conversely, you could have really strong kingdoms that run warriors and tax and can easily crush everyone, but they can't compete for honor without going war hero. So you can have a B tier kingdom that's really going to take all the honor. And they're not completely worthless either. Once your V count or count, the honor effects are pretty strong. You have plus 50% honor effects as well, so you have more honor tiers and stronger honor. And 10% OME in war is sort of half of a warrior buff. Resilience science efficiency, it's decent, it's not the best. So I think war hero is worth picking. It's slightly worse than warrior, but it has a lot of other benefits, so think about that. And that's the changes. I went long, I was quiet, my throat hurts, I gotta go to work, etc. So that was H114, revised changes. Thanks for listening to my rant, and go find Discord and be happy or whatever. And there's a chance my sound cut out a few times during this because I kept noticing my cord was loose, so, fingers crossed. Okay, bye.